Have you ever felt like there's a part of you don't really understand? Like, you're not sure who you really are anymore? I've been there too. Let me share something with you. Maybe it'll help you see things a little clearer. There's this moment, and maybe you felt it too, when everything seems perfect. You're in a relationship, and it feels warm, alive, effortless. The kind where your heart feels lighter, where conversations flow freely, and even the silence is comforting. And then it shifts. Without warning, without explanation. Texts start to come late, hours, sometimes days. Calls that used to be spontaneous feel like they're scheduled, mechanical. And then, sometimes it's just silence. That kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It sits on your chest like a question mark that never turns into a sentence. I remember the first time I felt that kind of silence. I kept staring at my phone, refreshing the chat like it was broken. I told myself not to overthink it. I told myself I was just being paranoid. But deep down, my body already knew something had changed. It wasn't the absence of a message. It was the absence of presence. My mind spiraled fast. Did I say something wrong? Was I too much? Not enough? Did someone else show up in his life? I know this sounds familiar to a lot of people. That inner storm where your brain becomes a courtroom and you're the only one on trial. No evidence, no closure, just relentless interrogation from your own thoughts. And I wish I could tell you that I responded with grace or patience, but I didn't. I panicked. I sent more messages, trying to sound casual. I analyzed his last words like they were sacred texts. I scrolled through our photos. I played back old voice notes. I think what hurt the most wasn't that he disappeared. It was that I didn't understand why. It's a strange kind of heartbreak, one without a clean break. It's like being slowly erased from someone's life while you're still trying to hold your shape. And, it's easy to go to that place of self-blame. To think, maybe I cared too much. Maybe I should have been cooler, more detached. But caring isn't a weakness. Loving isn't a flaw. What I didn't realize back then, and what took me time to learn, is that silence doesn't always mean a lack of love. Sometimes it means someone's overwhelmed by how much they feel. I remember something Jung once said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. I used to think it was just about projecting negative traits. But I think it also applies to how we react to distance, to emotional withdrawal. Because when someone pulls away, it stirs up every fear we've buried. Fear of abandonment. Fear of being unworthy. Fear of not being enough to stay. And those fears, they're not just about the other person. They're old stories. Wound we carry. That silence? It echoed louder because it mirrored my own silence with myself. The places where I hadn't listened to my needs. The moments where I ignored my intuition just to keep someone close. I remember sitting alone one evening, phone face down, music playing low. And it hit me, the ache I was feeling wasn't just about missing him. It was about missing a part of me that I had slowly set aside. The part that felt confident, secure, alive even without a reply from someone else. That was the beginning of a shift. Not a big dramatic moment. Just a quiet decision to stop chasing answers outside of me. To sit in the discomfort. To breathe through the ache. To ask, what is this silence here to teach me? That night I cried. Not because I was broken, but because I finally let myself feel without trying to fix it. I wasn't trying to decode him anymore. I was just being honest with myself. Sometimes, the first step to healing isn't about understanding them. It's about understanding what their behavior reflects in us. What it awakens. What it challenges. And so I stayed. Not in a relationship that was fading, but I stayed with myself. I didn't run from the pain. I didn't numb it. I didn't make it about proving my worth. I made it about remembering it. I think that's how it begins, the path to self-acceptance. Not with answers, not with closure, but with the willingness to sit in the silence and listen for something deeper than words. Because sometimes the silence doesn't mean you're not loved. It just means you're being invited to love yourself louder than ever before. It took me a while to understand that love isn't always loud. That sometimes love sounds like silence, or looks like distance, or feels like confusion. And that can really mess with your head, because we're taught to equate love with presence, with constant reassurance, with closeness. But I've learned something strange and beautiful. Sometimes, the deeper the connection, the more likely one of you might need to step back. Not to leave, but to breathe. At the time, that didn't make sense to me. I thought love should pull us closer, always. I thought if someone truly cared, they'd want to talk, to explain, to be near. But what I've come to realize is that love, real, deep, soul-wrenching love, doesn't always follow that script. He pulled away right when things were becoming real, when I thought we were finally safe with each other, and it felt like betrayal. But it wasn't. It was fear. And I don't mean the kind of fear that comes from doubt. I mean the fear that comes from intensity. When something matters so much that it shakes the foundation of who you think you are. That kind of fear makes people retreat. Not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. It's like a dance, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And every step back can feel like rejection. But sometimes it's just recalibration. He didn't leave because he stopped loving. He stepped back because he didn't know how to handle what was waking up inside him. That terrified part of him, the one that thought loving someone meant losing himself, started screaming. And the only way he knew how to protect that part was to disappear for a while. I didn't understand that then. I thought I did something wrong, that I asked for too much, that I was too much. But now I see it differently. He wasn't pulling away from me. He was pulling away from the mirror. Because love, especially the honest kind, reflects us back to ourselves. And when someone isn't ready to face what they see, their fears, their wounds, their unmet needs, they run. He told me once, in a rare moment of honesty, that being close to me made him feel exposed. Not in a bad way, but in a way that cracked something open in him. He said he hadn't felt that kind of emotional gravity before, like his soul was being asked to show up in ways he hadn't practiced. That hit me, because I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. I just wanted him, present, real. But for someone who spent his life protecting his inner world, even simple presence can feel like a threat. I started seeing the distance not as absence, but as a kind of pressure valve. When the emotions got too intense, he needed to back off. Not because he didn't care, but because he was overwhelmed. And you know what? I get it now. We all have our limits. Women often process emotions by talking, by seeking connection. Men, on the other hand, many of them process through silence, solitude. Not because they don't feel deeply, but because they don't always have the tools to make sense of it in real time. It's not better or worse. It's just different. But when you're on the receiving end of that silence, it can feel brutal. It can make you question everything. And yet, if we can understand that the silence isn't always about us, we can stop taking it personally. That doesn't mean we excuse all behavior. It doesn't mean we abandon our needs. But it does mean we can hold space for the other person and for ourselves without jumping to the worst conclusions. There's a kind of wisdom that comes when you stop reacting and start observing. When you let go of the urge to fix or force and just watch what's really happening beneath the surface. It's like watching a tide pull back before a wave crashes forward again. It looks like retreat, but it's just part of the rhythm. In love, there's a rhythm too. And I think real maturity is learning to dance with it. Not panic when the music slows down, not cling when the steps change. I used to chase. Now I breathe. I used to beg for answers. Now, I listen to my own. I used to make their distance mean I was unlovable. Now, I know my worth isn't up for negotiation. If someone needs space, let them have it. If someone pulls away, don't chase, witness. And if the connection is real, they'll find their way back. Not because you pushed, but because they chose. And honestly, isn't that what we all want? Not love that's forced, but love that's free and still returns. There's a moment, and it doesn't always announce itself, when love stops being romantic and starts being real. Not the dreamy, butterflies kind of real. I'm talking about the your fears just collided with mine kind of real. The kind of real where things get messy, quiet, uncertain. That's what happened with him. One day, things felt soft and safe. The next, I could feel him slipping, not out of love, but into himself. And the scariest part? He didn't say a word. He just faded. At first, I took it personally. Of course I did. I assumed I triggered something, pushed too hard, asked for too much. I was so focused on what I might have done wrong that I completely missed what he was going through. He wasn't pulling away to hurt me. He was collapsing inward because he didn't know what else to do. You see, we talk a lot about how men are emotionally unavailable, but not enough about why. Not enough about what happens in a man's mind when he's confronted with emotional intensity that he doesn't have the tools to navigate. For him, being with me, being truly seen, woke something up. And when you've gone your whole life hiding behind roles, expectations, or even silence, that kind of exposure feels violent. Not because it is, but because it strips away the armor you've spent years building. I don't think he even knew what was happening to him. All I knew was that the man who once held me with steady eyes now couldn't look me in the face for more than a few seconds. I later learned this wasn't about a loss of feeling. It was an overflow. His mind entered chaos mode. It was all too real, too fast, too intense. He started asking himself questions he never voiced. Am I good enough for her? What if I disappoint her? What if I lose myself in this? What if I can't live up to what she sees in me? And here's the kicker. He didn't talk to anyone about it. Not his friends. Not me. Not himself even. He just shut down. That's the quiet war so many men fight. They don't always know how to process big feelings, so they withdraw. Not because they're indifferent, but because they're overwhelmed. Imagine someone who's been taught to swim in shallow water, suddenly being thrown into the ocean. That was him. So he retreated, into silence, into solitude, into avoidance. Not out of cruelty, but out of panic. And I waited. I doubted. I overanalyzed. I spiraled. What I didn't know then was that he was fighting a battle I couldn't see. Inside, he was trying to hold onto himself. The version he knew, the one who didn't feel this vulnerable, this seen, this loved. Because love, when it's real, does something wild to the psyche. It dismantles you. It shows you everything you've been running from. Your insecurities, your inadequacies, your old wounds. He was facing all of that, alone. And while I would have given anything to help, he didn't know how to let me in. Not without feeling like he'd lose himself. That's the cruel irony. The deeper the love, the greater the fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being too much. Fear of being known and then rejected. So he went into emotional hiding. And I, on the outside, mistook it for disinterest. But if I'm being honest, I get it now. I really do. When your soul starts to open, when love cracks you wide, it can feel like dying. Because in a way, it is a kind of death. The death of your defenses. The death of your illusions. The death of your independence as protection. And he wasn't ready for that. Not yet. So he chose silence. Not because he didn't care, but because he didn't know how to stay and still feel safe. I share this not to justify the pain silence causes, because it does hurt, but to offer another lens. Sometimes, the person who goes quiet isn't ghosting you. They're ghosting themselves. And the best thing you can do in that moment, for them, and for you, is stop trying to rescue them from their own darkness. Let them face it. Let them wrestle with it. Let them emerge on their own terms. Because real love isn't about saving. It's about seeing and trusting that if it's meant to last, they'll find their way back. Not because you chased, but because they chose to return whole. That's what makes love real. Not the staying when it's easy, but the returning when it's hard. After a while, I stopped checking my phone so much. Not because I didn't care anymore. I still did, probably more than I wanted to admit. But I realized that my entire nervous system was tethered to a notification that wasn't coming. That my peace had become dependent on someone else's response. And something about that felt wrong, or at least unbalanced. I didn't stop loving him. I just started listening more to myself, to the quiet voice inside that had been drowned out by fear and longing. But even as I pulled back, I still noticed the subtle ways he stayed connected. They were small things, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. A like on a post, a comment on a story, a text every few days that didn't say much but said enough. At first, I didn't know what to make of it. Was it guilt? Was it habit? Was it breadcrumbing? But when I tuned into the tone, not just the words, I could feel something else, presence, a kind of quiet care that never fully disappeared. And when we saw each other in person, even briefly, it was there too, in the way he looked at me, softer than before. In how he listened when I spoke, even if he didn't say much back. In the way his body subtly leaned toward mine, like a compass still pointing home. That's when I realized something. Even in his silence, he was still reaching. Not with grand gestures, but with fragile threads. Threads of connection that said, I'm still here. I'm just figuring myself out. And honestly, that changed the way I saw everything. It made me wonder how many times I had misread someone's quiet as rejection when it was really a cry for space, for breath, for safety. Because sometimes love doesn't roar. It whispers. It shows up in a delayed reply that still holds warmth. In a text that doesn't say, I miss you, but asks how your day was. In the way someone holds eye contact just a second longer than they need to. These aren't accidents. They're emotional echoes. Reminders that the bond didn't vanish. It just went underground. I started thinking about how much we expect love to look a certain way. Immediate, loud, consistent. And sure, that kind of love is beautiful. But sometimes love is quiet, messy, uncertain, and still deeply real. He never said the words outright, but I saw in the way he showed up, imperfectly, sporadically, but honestly. And when he did speak, even if it was brief, there was a kind of depth in his words that hadn't been there before. Less small talk, more soul. And I had to ask myself, could I honor that? Could I receive love in a different language than the one I was used to? Could I let go of the need for constant affirmation and tune into the rhythm of something slower, more subtle? It wasn't easy. My ego wanted more. My heart wanted certainty. But my soul was curious. So, instead of chasing, I observed. Instead of clinging, I listened. And in that stillness, I began to understand what was happening on a deeper level. He wasn't avoiding me. He was navigating himself. His fears, his shadow, his longing to connect clashing with his need to remain whole. It was a battle I couldn't fight for him, and I realized I didn't need to. All I had to do was stay open without losing myself, soft without becoming a doormat, present without becoming his emotional oxygen tank. I could let him be in his process, and I could be in mine. And here's the thing. When someone's doing deep inner work, it rarely looks pretty. It often looks like distance, like confusion, like contradiction. But if you pay close attention, not to the drama, but to the essence, you'll feel the truth. Love doesn't vanish just because it's quiet, and neither should you. There's a kind of ache that only uncertainty can create. It's not the sharp pain of heartbreak or the finality of goodbye. It's something murkier, more exhausting, like trying to hold on to fog. That's what I felt during that time. It was the not knowing that nearly broke me. I wanted to do something, anything to get clarity, to get him back. I drafted texts I never sent. I replayed old conversations in my head, looking for signs, clues, warnings I had missed. I considered showing up where I knew he might be, just to see his face again. But deep down, I knew none of that would help. Because when someone's pulling away to find themselves, the worst thing you can do is try to pull them back. And still, every instinct in me wanted to fix it, to force closeness, to do something. I had to fight those instincts. Not because they weren't valid. They came from love, from fear, from longing, but because acting on them would have meant betraying myself. So I made a different choice. I stopped reaching, not out of spite, not to manipulate, but because I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about him. It was about me too, about how much of myself I was willing to lose in the name of keeping someone else close, about whether I believed I was still worthy of love, even when I wasn't being chosen in the way I wanted. That was the hardest part, not letting him go, but staying with myself. Because when someone you love goes quiet, it's easy to fill that silence with noise, with stories, with self-blame, with action that stems from panic instead of peace. But there's another way, a quieter way. It looks like sitting with your pain instead of escaping it. It looks like redirecting your attention from how do I get them back to what is this trying to teach me? It looks like trusting that real love doesn't require begging. So I started doing things differently. I stopped staring at my phone. I went for long walks without checking it. I journaled the things I was too ashamed to say out loud. I allowed myself to cry, not just little polite tears, but gut-deep sobs that wrung the grief out of me like a soaked cloth. And you know what happened? I started hearing me again. The voice that had been drowned out by worry. The intuition that knew I hadn't done anything wrong. The knowing that love isn't always something you hold on to. Sometimes it's something you have to let breathe. It was around that time I remembered something an old friend once told me. You can't hold on to someone with a clenched fist. You have to open your hand and trust that if it's meant, they'll stay. That image stayed with me. A hand open, soft, trusting, not desperate, not grabbing, just allowing. I started to embody that, not as a performance, not as a way to win him back, but because it felt better, because it felt like me. The version of me that didn't need to chase or prove. The version of me that believed in her own light, whether or not someone else was standing beside it. And slowly, something shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was responding to life, to my emotions, to my needs. I started asking better questions. Not, why is he doing this? But what part of me is still healing? Not, how do I get him to see my worth? But where have I forgotten it myself? This wasn't about indifference. It was about self-respect. About refusing to make someone else's emotional confusion the definition of my value. And let me be honest, it wasn't a clean process. Some days I felt strong. Other days I was a puddle. I had moments where I wanted to scream, to beg, to just know what he was thinking, but I didn't act on those impulses. I felt them deeply, and I let them pass. That, I think, is one of the bravest things we can do in love. Feel fully, but act with integrity. It's easy to react out of fear, harder to respond from truth. But every time I chose the latter, I felt a little more like myself. And that, more than anything, is what healed me. Not his return, not an explanation, but my own quiet return to me. Something changes the moment you stop resisting what is. Not because the pain disappears, but because it stops defining you. I used to think acceptance meant giving up, that it was the same as surrendering in defeat. But I've learned that true acceptance is powerful. It's not passive, it's intentional. It says, I see what's real. I don't like it. I don't want it. But I will stop pretending it's something else. And in that moment, everything softens. That's what happened when I stopped fighting his distance. I stopped needing a reason. I stopped needing a resolution. I let go of the idea that closure had to come from him. Instead, I looked inward, and what I found surprised me. There was a quiet strength there, a part of me that I had forgotten, a part that whispered, you're allowed to hurt, but you're also allowed to heal. So I gave myself permission to both, and I began turning my focus back toward my own life, not as a distraction, but as a reclamation. I started journaling every morning, not just about him, but about me, about what I wanted, what I missed, what I feared, what I was proud of. I cleaned my space, bought flowers for myself, took walks just to feel the wind on my face. I met a friend for coffee and actually listened instead of using the time as an emotional escape hatch. I played music that didn't remind me of him. I read books that cracked me open in new ways. And most of all, I got quiet. Not in a lonely way, in a grounded way. I stopped reacting to every emotional wave. I started watching them roll in and out like tides. Some days the tide brought sadness. Others it brought clarity. But whatever it brought, I let it come. Because I wasn't afraid of my feelings anymore. And that, I realized, was the transformation. Not forgetting him, not moving on out of spite, but letting myself become someone new in the presence of my own pain. There's a quote I love by Jung. You probably know it. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. I didn't resist the silence anymore. I accepted it. And slowly, it stopped feeling like punishment. It started to feel like space. Space to breathe. Space to reflect. Space to choose who I wanted to be, not just in this relationship, but in all the ones that would follow. And I realized that maybe this wasn't about whether or not he would come back. Maybe it was about who I would become, regardless. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was evolving. I stopped asking, what does he want from me? And started asking, what do I want for myself? That shift was subtle, but it was everything. Because in the end, we all want love. But we forget that love starts inside. Not the self-love cliches you see on Instagram, but the real kind. The kind where you sit with your pain and don't abandon yourself. The kind where you stay present when it would be easier to numb. The kind where you say, Even if no one else shows up, I will. And from that place, everything changes. You stop chasing. You stop performing. You stop settling for crumbs because you know you're worthy of full meal. And you stop needing someone else's closeness to feel complete. So when, or if, they return, you're not desperate. You're discerning. Not because you're cold, but because you've learned to value your own warmth. And if they don't return, you're not destroyed, because you've already found your way home, to yourself. There's something sacred that happens when you let go, not as a tactic, not to teach someone a lesson, but because you've finally made peace with what you cannot control. That was me, quietly, gently letting go of the outcome. And in doing that, something unexpected happened. I found clarity, a kind of peace that didn't depend on whether he came back, apologized, or even understood what I had been through. It came from knowing I had walked through the fire and not only survived, but grown. I used to think love was about holding on, about staying close no matter what. But real love is a dance, a rhythm, a pulse that moves between closeness and space, intensity and calm. It's not always neat or predictable. Sometimes it looks like walking beside each other. Sometimes it looks like walking alone, but still facing the same direction. He did reach out again, eventually, not with a dramatic apology or a grand romantic gesture. Just a simple message. Hey, been thinking about you. Can we talk? And something in me had shifted so deeply by then that I wasn't thrown off balance. I didn't panic or rush to reply. I took a breath. I smiled. I felt the ground beneath my feet. Because whether we talked or didn't, whether he returned or didn't, I knew who I was now. I wasn't the girl refreshing her phone. I wasn't the one trying to decode silences. I wasn't afraid of the pause anymore. If anything, I had learned to respect it. Because in that pause, in that space where everything felt lost, I had found myself. When we did meet, it was different. The energy was calmer, deeper, more grounded. He looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen before, but also a kind of reverence, like he knew I wasn't the same woman he had left in that silent space. And he was right. I wasn't. We talked honestly. No blum, no quiescence, just truth. He told me about his fear of losing himself in the relationship. I told him about the fear of being abandoned without warning. We didn't try to fix everything that night. We just acknowledged what had been true for both of us. And it was enough. Enough to begin again. Not from the place we left off, but from where we stood now. Two people who had faced their own shadows and returned a little more whole. That's the kind of love I want now. Not the one that demands constant closeness, but the one that understands the beauty of space. The kind of love that says, go if you need to, I'll be here, and I'll be okay. Because love isn't about ownership. It's about freedom. Freedom to feel. Freedom to fear. Freedom to fall apart and still find your way back. Not out of need, but out of choice. I've come to believe that the strongest love isn't the one that survives without change. It's the one that transforms and allows you to transform too. And in the end, that's what we did. Not perfectly, not without bumps, but with presence, with honesty, with grace. We learned that love doesn't mean losing yourself for someone else. It means finding yourself alongside someone who's doing the same. So now, when I think of that time, the silence, the space, the ache, I don't see it as a chapter one wish I could erase. I see it as sacred, as necessary, as the moment that changed everything. Not because of what it took from me, but because of what it gave me. Myself. If this felt meaningful to you, it might mean something to someone else too. So hit like, leave a comment, or subscribe. That's how YouTube knows to share it with others. Maybe together, we can help someone see things a little differently.